Hello everyone and welcome to this lecture. My name is Burhanuddin and in this lecture we are going to learn about working with APIs and JSON. So what will this allow is you to pass the data from the internet directly to your application. So in this way you can keep your application updated dynamically as every time you will fetching the latest data. So for that, first of all, let's just learn about JSON, that what is JSON actually is. So for that, I will just open any editor. So let me just open the Sublime Text as my editor. Okay, so let's just create a new file. Okay, so we want to talk about JSON. So first of all, what does JSON means? So JSON is a short form for JavaScript object notation. Okay, so we use JSON to represent the data. So JSON is basically a data representation format. Okay, so there are many more other formats available for representing data like XML, but why particularly we use JSON for the APIs? Okay, the reason that we use JSON is very lightweight and easy to read and write format as compared to XML. As we know that the XML file that we create in Android, it contains of multiple tags and opening and closing brackets and stuff. But in JSON, we don't need to do that. So JSON is very easy to read and write. And the next thing is the JSON format integrates easily with most of the languages. So that is why the JSON is commonly used for APIs. Now, there are certain types that we can represent, as we all know that JSON is a data representation format, but there are certain types that we can represent in JSON. So they are string. We can represent any string value inside a JSON. Then we can also represent a number. Now, as I say number, if you are coming from the Java, you know there in number there are particular categories like integer, floats and other stuff. But when I say number, it means every kind of number. It can be a decimal number or a positive integer or a negative integer. JSON will accept any kind of number. The next thing that we can represent using JSON is a Boolean value. We can simply represent a Boolean value such as true or false. Okay, so the next thing we can represent using JSON is a null value. So null basically means an empty string. We can also represent that in JSON. The next thing that we can represent using JSON are arrays. So basically we use JSON to represent data. Now data will be in multiple values, right? We will not have data. We will not have any single data. We always have to represent the multiple data or fetch the multiple data from the internet. So we can store those multiple values inside an array. Okay, and the last thing that the JSON represents is an object. Now, object is a very important type in JSON as it consists of a key value pair, as we do the same thing for the hash maps. So we can also represent the objects in JSON. Okay, now we have learned about what is JSON and why do we use it and what are the types that can be represented in JSON. But now let's just talk about how can we use JSON. Okay, now in order to use JSON, let's just create a new file first. Now I need to save this file with a particular extension. Okay, as we know that if we are having a text file, then the extension of that file will be txt. If we are having an HTML file, then the extension of the file will be .html. If we are having a CSS file, then the extension for that will be CSS. And if we are having a Java file, then the extension for that will be .java. Similarly, we have a particular extension for our JSON files and that is .json. Okay, so it will follow like this. If I want to save this file, and then I can save this file as, I can say user.json. Okay, as you can see now, the extension of my file is .json. So this simply represents that this file is a JSON file. Now I can place my values inside this. Now in order to place values inside JSON, we need to follow a particular syntax, and that syntax is the values inside the JSON file will be in an object form, and that object form will be residing inside curly braces. So inside these curly braces, I can represent my value. Now I can represent any string file, any number file, or any boolean value. For example, I can represent any string file. Remember, we always write the strings inside the double quotation marks. So I can represent my data like if I want to represent the name, I can just simply say name inside the string, and this is my JSON file, and that's it. I can now use this JSON file onto my server, and then I can fetch the data from it. But in reality, we will not have this single data inside our JSON file, as we want to store multiple data inside our JSON file. So what we can do is just simply, if we have multiple data, what we can do is simply separate them using comma. Okay, but we are using but in JSON file we need to identify that data. So how we can do that is using a key value pair. As I told you that everything inside every value inside a JSON file will be in an object form. So for example, this name is my key and my value will be my name, that is Burhanuddin. Okay, so in this way I can store data inside my JSON file. But what if I have multiple data? So I can for example, I have another data with the name is programmer. So and I want to use the boolean value for it, and I can say true, but I have multiple values inside my JSON file now. So how can I separate them? In order to separate multiple values inside a JSON file, we can do that using a comma. And now as you can see, we can use multiple values inside our JSON file. Okay, so let's just enter more values inside it. And remember one thing, we do not need to put any comma after our last value. Okay, so that's a particular syntax that we need to follow. Now, for example, as I told you earlier that we have multiple values to be fed inside our JSON file, but every values is stored in a form of an object. But what if I have multiple objects to be stored inside my JSON file? How can I store that? I can store them using arrays. So how can I use arrays inside my JSON file? Simply, for using array, we need to put box bracket before our curly braces. So I can put a box bracket up here, and I can put another box bracket down here. Now this curly braces is for a particular object. Now if I want to put another object inside it, I can just put a comma after this curly braces, and then I can open another curly braces and I can put my another values inside it. Okay, so I can again say name. Don't forget to put the double quotes while representing the string value. So the next thing will be name. Let's just feed in some values, and actually we are going to use this value inside our Android app. So let me just feed another data. Okay, so what else I want is address. So I can say address Now one more data with name Dhruti, address will be, let's just say Godhra, and we have to put the comma here. is programmer. Let's just put this value to be false, and let me add one more data, and let me say Manish, let's say address to be okay. So as you can see, now we have fed in some data inside our JSON file, and we can use this data to be fetched inside our application, but we need to fetch the data from the internet, and in order to fetch the data from the internet, we need to upload our data to the internet. And how can do that? We can if a person having a dedicated server with him can directly upload their data to the server, but in our case, if we don't have any hosting, we need to find out a certain way with which we can upload our data or our JSON file on the internet, and then we can use that URL in order to fetch the data inside our Android application. Okay, so let me open our Chrome browser, and first of all I want to show you that there is a website on which you can check your JSON file that it is formatted in a correct format or not. Okay, so I'll suggest you to use this website. So you can just go on and open up your Chrome browser and search for jasonlint.com, or you can follow or you can just type in this URL jasonlint.com. Now here I can paste my JSON data in order to validate it. Now Sublime Text will automatically validate my JSON file as I have saved this file with .json extension, but still I want to show you if you are not using any editor, then how can you validate your JSON. Okay, so just simply go to this website jasonlint.com and paste your data right here, and now I can just click on this validate JSON button, and now as you can see in the result section it is showing me that valid JSON. So now my JSON is completely valid, but how can I upload this thing to the internet? Okay, so now after validating our data inside our JSON file that it is valid or not, now what we need to do is upload this JSON file into the internet. So in order to access the or in order to fetch the data from the internet, we need to upload the data on the internet, right? So what the people really do is upload their JSON file onto the server, and then it gives them a link, and then that link is later on used in order to fetch the data from the server inside our Android applications. Okay, so for uploading our JSON file, as we don't have any dedicated server, what we can do is upload our JSON file onto the GitHub, which is the simplest way of doing this. Okay, so let me just go back to my JSON file. We have mistakenly put these boolean values inside this semicolon double quotes, so I will remove that. Okay, so we are good now. So what we'll do that we will move on to the GitHub. So I'll type github.com and I'll open this link, and if you don't have an account, just go on and create your account. So now the next thing I want to do is create a new repository. So now we are going to use a combination of GitHub and GitHub pages in order to host our data, that is the JSON file, online. So simply what we need to do is just click on this new button in order to create a new repository, and then it will help us to create a new repository. So we will just enter our repository name here. So I will write a name as JSON demo. Okay, so as you can see, the name is available on my repository, and I'll keep this as a public, and let me just create a new repository. So now after it is created a new repository for you, make sure you have a GitHub desktop installed in your PC, and I will set up this repository in desktop in order to upload my JSON data file. And now I'll just click on this clone button in order to clone the repository in my PC. Okay, so now the JSON demo repository is cloned inside my PC. So what can I do is just simply click on this show in Explorer button, and it will open up the repository inside my computer. So what can I do now that my JSON user.json file is stored inside my desktop? So I can just navigate to that file. Here it is, and I can just simply copy this file and paste it right here. Now, if I move back to my GitHub desktop, I can now simply just upload this, and that will be commit, and I can just publish this branch to my repository. Now as you can see, the file is uploaded to my GitHub, and I can just simply click on this view on GitHub button. Now this will show me my repository inside the on my GitHub account. So here is our JSON file. If I click on this file, as you can see that here is our data. Now we need to find a way that we can access this data, and for that we need a URL. We actually cannot use this URL inside our application, as it will open up HTML code for this page, but actually we need to access this data. So we can actually do that with the help of the GitHub pages. So in order to enable the GitHub pages, what we need to do is simply go on to the settings, and then we need to scroll down at the bottom, and here you will find about GitHub pages. So in order to enable the GitHub pages, first we need to select the branch from which we need to keep our pages up to date. So I will select the master branch, and I will click on save. Now, in order to publish a page, we need to choose a theme. So click on this choose a theme and select any of them. I will click on this default and select a theme. As it is a static site generator, it needs a theme to compile your HTML site. Okay, but as we don't have any index.html file, this link will not work, but our JSON file will work for sure. So what next? So just refresh this page and remember your repository name. So this is very useful. So for now, let's just leave this Chrome browser open as it is, and let's just open the Android Studio and create a new Android project. Okay, so click on this start a new Android Studio project and select the empty activity and click on next. Okay, so I will name my project as JSON demo. Okay, so remember one thing, while the Gradles are built, let's just move back to the Chrome browser, and I want to show you one thing. Anyone with this link can fetch the data from your file. Okay, isn't this great? Yeah, it is. So let's just move back to the Android Studio, and our Gradles are built successfully now. So let me just make it full screen. Okay, so now let's just design our activity underline main, that is our XML file first. So I'll open this file, and let's just close this project pane and switch to the split view, And first of all, I will remove this constraint layout and change it to linear layout. Now I want the background to be same as my color of my action bar, so I will set it to color primary. Okay, so let's just remove this text view. Okay, so what I want now, so let's just design our layout first inside our whiteboard. So I'll open my whiteboard right here. Okay, so this is the layout from our previous video. So right now let's just remove it. Okay, so first what we want, okay, so first thing we want is a button. I want a button on the top which will say fetch data. So whenever the user will click on this button, there should be a text view right here at the bottom, which will span to the rest of my screen. Oops. Okay, and this text view will store the data which will be fetched from the internet. Okay, so we need to design this layout inside our Android file. So let's just move back to the Android Studio and let me just design the layout. Okay, so the first thing we need is a button. So I will just select this button, and the layout width would be of match parent, and the layout height would be of 50 dp. Okay, so let's just put the text here. So I will say this button will say fetch data. Fetch data. Okay, now the next thing we need is to put background color. So let's just put the background color to be white. For that I'll say FFF, and the text size, let's just increase the text size a little bit. I'll say 18 sp. Okay, so that's good. And now what we want is a text view below this button, but first let's just assign an ID to this button, and for that I'll say ID equals to let's just say fetch data btn. Okay, remember to always assign a proper name to your Android UI components. Okay, next thing, let's just add a text view below this. So I'll say text view and layout width to be wrap match parent. If I put the text here to be text, and now okay, so it is actually not showing me because we know that by default the orientation of a linear layout is horizontal. So let me just change the orientation to be vertical. So for that I will say orientation and I will say vertical. So now as you can see, here is our text view. So if I run our app now, so as you can see, our application is up and running now, and this is our button and this is our text view. So okay, so let's just do one thing, let's just change the text color of this text view. So I'll say text color to be white, and the text size to be 24 sp. Okay, so one thing that we need to remember, first let's just assign some padding of 8 dp. Now the thing that we should remember is the data will be large in size. There will be multiple values when we fetch our data, so it is possible that all the data is not may not fit into our screen size. Okay, so what we need to do is make this text view scrollable. So we need to make this text view scrollable. So how can we do that? Is simply putting a scroll view around this text view. So for that I will simply say scroll view, and the width will be match parent and height will be match parent 2. Okay, and let me just close this right here, and inside this scroll view let's just put our text view. Okay, so our layout is ready now. Let me just assign an ID to the text view and we are good to go then. So I will say Android ID, and this will be say fetch data. Instead of button I will say txt. Okay, so our XML file is ready now. So let's just move on to the main activity and design and write our Java code. But first of all, as we are fetching the data from the internet, we need to access some permission. Okay, so if you have guessed it correctly, in order to access the data from the internet, we need to ask for the internet permission. And where do we define the permission? Inside our manifest file. So let's just open our Android manifest file and define our permission. So I can ask for the permission right here. So I can say that use this permission android.permission.internet, and then I can simply close this tag, and now I can write my logic inside our main activity. So first of all, let's just instantiate our UI components. So the first component that we have is a button. So I'll say private button, and it will be named as fetch data Okay, so the next thing we have is a text view. So I will say pub private text view with the name fetch data txt, and let's just instantiate them right here. So I will say fetch data btn equals to find view by id r.id dot fetch data btn right here, and semicolon at the end. And same for the text view, I will say fetch data txt equals to find view by id r.id dot fetch data txt. Okay, let's just put the semicolon at the end. Now what we want is whenever the user click on this button, we want the text view, this text view to contain all the data from our JSON file. Okay, so for that what we can do is click an on-click listener. So let's just create an anonymous on-click listener for this button. So I will say fetch data button dot set on click listener new on click listener, and then I can put my logic here. But first of all, what we need to do is create a Java file which can fetch the data. Now you may be asking that, hey, why are you not applying the logic right here inside this button click? So the reason behind that is that whenever we are doing some heavy operations, we don't want to do them inside our main UI thread. That is, if we do that on the main UI thread, what will happen that it will freeze my Android application and it will not allow my user to do anything, and we don't want to use or do that. Okay, so what we'll do is create a separate file in order to create a separate thread on which we will run our task of fetching the data from the internet. Okay, so let's just create a new Java file. So I'll go to this Java folder, I'll open it up, and I will right click on my package folder. I'll click on new Java class, and I can name this class as let's just say fetch data. So I will say fetch data. Okay, now in order to fetch the data and in order to create a new thread, I need to extend this class. So I will extend this class, I'll say extend, and I will use async task. So I'll say async task, this one. Okay, now I need to provide 3 parameters to this. So I will for now let's just say a void, that as we don't want to specify any parameter right now, so I can simply say void 3 times as it carries 3 parameters. So I'll say again void and void again. Okay, now it is still showing me an error. This is because we need to implement some methods. So to implement the methods, just hold the Alt key and click on enter, and let's just implement the methods. So it is says we need to implement do in background method. So this method is very important for us. So let's just override this method, and first of all let's just create a string variable. So now I need to create a string variable in order to store the data that I am fetching from the internet. Okay, so let's just create a string variable right here. So I will say string data, and I will initialize this variable to a null value. Okay, so now the next thing I will need to do is let's just go back to our browser, and let's just copy this URL. Now we need to paste this URL somewhere in our code, but remember one thing, this URL right here is still the repository. Okay, so this URL will redirect the user to my repository, but I don't want to get redirected to my repository. Instead, I want to access the data inside the user.json file. So I need to put user.json at the end of this URL. So how can we do that? Is simply just go here and let's just create another string variable with the name URL. So I will say string, let's just say data URL, and I'll paste my string value right here and put the semicolon at the end. Now let's just put our file name right here. So it was user in capital and .json. Now this URL will redirect to my user.json file. Okay, so now let's just put our logic inside do in background. Okay, so what we need to do is fetch the data from this URL. So I'll create the object of a URL class. So for that I will type URL in capital, and then let's just create an object with the name URL, and with the help of the new keyword let's just create a new object. Now we need to specify the URL that from which we want to fetch the data in the parameter. So we can pass this data URL object inside this URL. So I can simply say data URL and put the semicolon at the end. Now it is showing me an error which says they surround it with the try catch block. You can see it by holding control. Okay, by holding Alt and click on enter. As you can see, it is showing me now that surround it with try catch. So I can just click on enter and it will automatically surround my code around the try catch block. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is open up an HTTP connection. Okay, so how we can do that is simply create a HTTP URL connection object, and then we can use the open connection method in order to open the connection. So for that, let's just create the HTTP URL connection method, and then I'll create the object for this. I will say HTTP URL connection, and then I will say URL. I will use this URL object, and I'll say URL.open connection, and let's just put the semicolon at the end. Okay, so two things that we need to do is, first we need to handle the exception for this, and the next thing is we need to do is to convert it of this URL.open connection or to be of HTTP URL connection type. Okay, so let me just do it. So I can just hold the Alt and click on enter, and it will automatically at the catch close for me. And now again I can just hold enter and click on enter, and it will cast it automatically for me. As you can see, it has cast this URL.open connection to be of HTTP URL connection type. Okay, so the next thing we need to do, so these two lines of code will open the connection and from this URL. Okay, but we need to fetch the data from this URL. So how we can do that is with the help of input stream. Okay, so with the help of input stream, we can read the data. So how we can do that is we can create an object of input stream. We will use this HTTP URL connection object, and then I will say get input stream. Now, in order to read the data from the input stream, we need to create a buffer reader object. Okay, so let's just create a new buffer reader. Now I'll create the new input stream reader. So for that, I will say new input stream reader, and I'll simply pass the input stream object inside it. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need let's just create another string variable in order to add the data that we are getting together. So what I will do is let's just create a string variable right here only. So I will say string, let me call it line, and let's just initialize it with null value. Okay, so now in order to fetch the data from the buffer or read the data from the buffer reader, let's just use the while loop. Okay, so this will execute until there is data or there is some data inside the buffer reader. So what I'll do is I will simply say while, I'll use this line that while line is not equals to null. What it will do is it will say line equals to I will use this buffer reader object, and I will use this method read line. Okay, I'll put the semicolon at the end, and now I'll simply add this line or the data that we are getting, and I will append it with my string data. Let me just put the D in small. Okay, we are good to go now. So yeah, that was it for this do in background method. Now what we need to do, after we have fetched the data from the internet, we need to set the data to my text view. Okay, so after fetching the data, I need to fetch the data, set the data to my text view, and the name of my text view was this fetch data txt. So we can for doing that, we have a method which is called on pause execute. So we can actually use that method in order to do, or in order to specify what to do after the background task is completed. So I can use that on pause execute, this one. Okay, so I can specify right here that after the data is fetched from the internet, you should change the text view which is residing inside my main activity. So I can now access to my text view, that is fetch. Okay, so one thing is missing right here, that inside our main activity.java file, we have set this text view to the private. That is, I cannot access this text view outside of this main activity.java class. Okay, so in order to access this text view outside my class, I need to make it public static. So I will say public static text view fetch data txt. Okay, so now I can access this fetch data txt, as you can see, outside my main activity.java class. Now simply I will use the set text method in order to set the text. So I will say set text, and then I will say data. Okay, so that was it. So let's just run our application and see whether it is fetching the data from the internet or not. Okay, so let me just click on this fetch data button. So mistakenly we have forgotten to apply the logic on the button click. So that was the reason that it was not fetching the data for us. So let's just create a new object of our class, that is fetch data. So let me just create a new object. So I'll say fetch data, and let's just say the object name to be process. Okay, so let me just create a new object by saying new fetch data. Okay, and semicolon at the end. Now I have to simply say process.execute. So I'll say process.execute. Okay, and semicolon at the end. So that was it. So now let's just run our application and see whether it is fetching the data for us or not. So let's just reinstall our application, and let me just open this and click on this fetch data button. And now as you can see, our data is getting fetched from the internet. But wait a second, you might be saying that, hey, what is this? It is not properly in a readable manner. So in order to make it in a readable manner, let's just modify our do in progress method. Okay, but do in background method. But in real world, you might not be doing this in this way, because in real world, when you will be creating any application, you might be putting the text inside a recycler view or a custom list view. You might not be putting the text inside the text view. So remember that whenever you are applying this to the real world application, you must use a custom list view or a recycler view in order to represent your data. But for the sake of the simplicity of this tutorial, I will not be using any custom list view or a recycler view. And then let's just pass the data in a readable manner with the help of some code inside our text view. Okay, so let's just move back to this fetch data .java activity, and let's just apply some more logic inside doing background file. So first of all, I want to declare two more string variables up here. So for them, I'll say string, and the first one will be, let's just call it single parse, which will parse a single object, and initialize it with null value. And the next one that I want to create is of for parsing the total data that we are getting. So I'll say data parse, and let's also initialize it too. Okay, so now let's just apply our logic after this while loop. Now remember, when we are creating our JSON file right here, I told you that in order to hold the multiple data, that is the multiple objects in JSON, we put them in array. So in order to fetch the multiple data, we need to create a JSON array. Okay, so let's just create a new JSON array. So I'll say JSON array and I'll create a new object for it. Let me just call it JSON array. Okay, and I will say new JSON array. Okay, so the next thing that I need to pass here is the data that we are getting from the internet. So I'll say data, which is this data. Okay, so I'll pass it right here and put the semicolon at the end. Now it is giving me an error, and if I hover on this error, it is showing me that the unhandled exception. So hold Alt and click on enter in order to etch the catch close. Okay, so the next thing that I need to do is, now let us create a for loop in order to parse this data. So we are using this for loop in order to separate each and every object from this JSON array. Okay, as we know that JSON array is a collection of JSON objects. Okay, so we need a for loop in order to separate those JSON objects. So let me just create a for loop, and I will say integer I, and I will say while I is less than JSON array dot length I plus plus. Okay, so now let's just create an object of JSON object. So I will say JSON object, and I will say JSON okay. So the next thing equals to JSON array. I will use the JSON array object. I'll say why I'm calling it JSON. It's JSON. Okay. Now in order to get the particular object at particular position, I will say dot get, and I will use this index value to be I, that is this I variable. Okay, and I'll put the semicolon at the end. Now I will okay, so it is giving me an error, and if I hover on this error, it says I need to convert it. So hold Alt and click enter, and let's just cast it to JSON object. So error is gone now. So let's just parse a single object. So for that I will use this string single parse. Now as we don't have any custom list view or recycler view, and we are working with a single text view, I will parse the data separately and individually with the help of the key that I have put inside the JSON object in order to read it properly. So I will say that name now in order to get the key value from the JSON object, I will say JSON object dot get, and I will use the same key name that I used while creating the JSON array. That is this one. Okay, so now let's just append other values too. So I will say, let's just put a /n in order to put the values in the next line. So now I will say, I'll do this for remaining values also. So I'll say address okay, so that was it. Let's just put the semicolon at the end, and now I need to combine this each single parse object with the total objects inside the array. So for that I will use the data parse. So I'll say data parse string equals to data parsed plus single parse. In order to separate each and every object inside my array, I will use /n in order to add a space between them. So I will say plus /n and semicolon at the end. Okay, so that was it. And instead of this data, I will now use this data parsed. Okay, so let's just run our application now and see whether it is working or not. So now let's just click on this fetch data button, and now as you can see, it is parsing the data for me, and now it is more readable. Okay, so yeah, that was it for this tutorial, and see you in the next video.